These notes here have been on the page of the Brandon website. Still digging into a lot of stuff and processing a lot of downloads. So there still could be eventual revisions on this. And again, just take everything before the Lord tests the spirits. And this is all something we're kind of going after together. So definitely welcome feedback and that kind of thing. There are mysteries in the Bible, right? When the word mystery is used, it doesn't mean that it'll never be known. Obviously, the seven thunders are something that will be unscrolled, right, at some point. And mysteries, I'm kind of the mind that we'll have the greatest amount of revelation, of course, in after the Lord's return, but in the time preceding it, which Matthew 24 would indicate that we're kind of close to that. But the Lord can do as He pleases there. Time is sort of relative as far as a lot of this stuff goes. But what we're looking at here is this. I think it's kind of easy to see a little bit to sort of put the pieces together, and with a couple different contexts, and then some of the information that's starting to come out. This is the time where we've seen a lot of these. There have been like false judgments and true judgments done in the house of the Lord. In a lot of places where the judgment began there, and then I think we're starting to see the Tower of Babel fall once again, and that's the great falling away. 2 Thessalonians talks about that's to this Jezebelic structure, and so there are just a lot of these different cults, covens, secret societies, these different type of groups, whatever. They're all having essentially the same sort of agenda, and it's really interesting because I remember hearing there was a church message talking about as much prayers as they've been doing night and day prayer for a long time. Much prayers happen, we should have seen revival happen by now, right? And I think part of this that is there is a strategic time of delay when all those prayers will be answered, but also there's this verse about He's the light of the world, we're the salt of the earth, and I've never seen the righteous forsaken, and the whole concept of just Christians were never meant to be in this extreme poverty of mindset. We're supposed to be humble and walk in humility and agreement, but that's the false humility is. We're, that whole we're just a worm. If God doesn't break in tomorrow, it's all over. It's we definitely need Him to break in and keep reaching for that. But we're so far away from what would be a biblical mindset, right? And that's what's been. Everything has been so attacked. 2,000 years of changing the culture of the identity, and we just got so far from it. And so. Obviously, toxic masculinity and patriarchy has created this sort of push-pull pendulum swing. It's the other direction in a sense. But then there is, within undergirding those systems, yet another entire power, which is the redirection of the provision in heaven. So let's unpack some of this here. So, mother of prostitutes and adverse abominations. Right, and that's where some of these systems, the secret societies or these religions and cults and stuff like that, and I'm not going to go after the entire things. And if you're in one of these groups, it's not personal. And there are people who have talked to a former of this, and that was their experience of what their role was. So maybe you're in the one that doesn't do this stuff. But there's enough information out there. There's the information age out. And the whole thing about the Tower of Babylon is that all the information is hidden and fragmented and separated by languages. And then now with the internet and social communities and everybody's connecting online, that Tower of Babylon, which is a tower that's meant to get to the second heavens, to get to the power of God, to be godlike, without God, essentially. Let us build and make a name for ourselves. And so there's a systematic, but it's it's just sounds like conspiracy theory. Well, we're talking about principalities, and so principalities are a lot of times it's demons, entities, these kind of things. And then so what are cults and covens? and again, you have to believe in the spiritual things. And I think that's getting easier because everybody is starting to like catch on to like, oh, it's a matrix or it's a simulation or these kind of things. That sort of mindset. And people might have that more than others. The more you say that, the more you think that way, the more it starts to look like the way. So I don't like encourage it. I like to adopt that perspective for the sense of like being intentional about what I watch and what I say and how I. It's like good for like prayer, because you can sort of see how the Lord can just do anything. Like, so you can walk on water because it's a simulation, right? But and also you don't want to like misuse the. It does. I guess it's helpful if you think of it just like you want to be spirit led, right? Jesus didn't trust the simulation; he trusted the Father, and though he knew that simulation would always work on his behalf, he would never worry for anything, and like he could just trust in the word of the Lord and not necessarily trust what he was seeing in the natural, because that could change in a moment, and it's God will literally part a sea. Okay, so that's a really key mindset to navigate how to get out of this. And then also prepare to the next big challenge, because after Babylon comes the false Christ, the Antichrist. So, the abomination of desolation and all these things. So, and that Israel's a big part of that. But it's all about Jesus coming back and the ending and the transference of power. And it's like this test of like, do you want the kingdom without the king? Are you okay with that? Because that's kind of what Babylon is. And then, like, even if you once you walk in your power, then what will you do with it? But not to minimize the real trauma of realizing, the trauma that you've already probably been through, and the systematic betrayals and all these things. Just someone was saying the other day, like, really good, was just like, whatever you're like struggling with, that's like you're probably meant to like have like part of your calling is to help other people with what you're struggling with, and so that's why it's attacked so much. Those kind of things. So the sorcery, right? Because that's the one thing that's people don't like talking about spiritual things. That's what I was talking about, the spiritual. So, like, the sorcery behind all of this stuff is you have to have understanding and belief in that witchcraft is real, and that prayer is real, angels are real, the spirit is real, and Jesus commands that. So if you're a Christian, or that's. Well, you've been systematically attacked into not believing that. Meanwhile, everybody else around, New Age is like stealing all a lot of the information. They're all walking in it, and of course the cults and the covens, all these groups. The cult and the coven does not mean powerless. It just means that they are stealing from others spiritually. In 1943, Hitler moved, and a lot of that Nazi stuff, that moves, it went to a spiritual Holocaust. And they know this, but it's like, this is the kind of information that's kind of a bit obscured, I guess, but is known. People have taken oaths and done all kinds of horrible stuff to get this information, or like to try to understand it. I'm not saying I have it or whatever, but the point is that they're deceived by the sorcery, and that has to do with like illusions and affecting people's perceptions and their consciousness, and like making them not understand their spiritual power. There are some that have had conversations with the people that they broke out, and it had like, there's a thing that like Luciferians have to do called revelation of the method. So they might recommend a movie or something, and it's like horror or something, and like that's like what they were doing to you basically, or to your family or something. So there have been some though that have also wanted to like minimize. They've been caught and things are not going good for them. They want to try to minimize what they call karma, and so they've disclosed certain things. And like some of these have been just like an understanding of like how much power Christians really have, right? And then like the amount of effort that is worked and is to redirect that so that Christians do not appear to be the kings and queens of the earth. Okay, and that's the Jezebel spirit, is gaslighting. And so a lot of the stuff that we're calling narcissism, these people have demonic things attached to them. Either maybe they were born into it, and bloodline is they're not always conscious. The more they ascend to that and they get into line with others of the same way, and then there's just a lot of secret societies and groups or whatever that people end up aligning to. Maybe they're targeted for fraternities or sororities, or it's the family thing, or even churches. Masons, obviously, Eastern Stars, but and of course the Eastern Stars is like the female version of the male, whatever. There's a lot of people who are just like either dating or marrying people or marrying them in spirit that are trying to manipulate spiritual law to get all the spiritual provision that a wife would have, and then redirect that energy and that inheritance into this sort of demonic grid. What is the power force behind Babel? And so the idea that Babylon would fall, right, and it's going to be judged by the actual Antichrist is interesting. So it's like, yes, this is going to end that, but right now, because all this stuff is, a lot of this is, the devil does this so that like the counterfeit comes first. I mean, man, if there's ever like a more, like what such an important word right now, counterfeit, knowing the difference, right? When Jesus says, you need eyes to hear eyes to hear, you need eyes to see and ears to hear, right? If you're talking about spiritual eyes, it's because there are so much stuff that's been happening in the spirit, spiritual theft and replacements spirits, and I can't even, some of the stuff, the witchcraft and all things like that, and some of it's illusions, some of it's real, all these things, it's meant to traumatize, or especially those who aren't used to this kind of stuff. But again, we don't want to marvel at this or be fascinated with this. We just want to be able to have discernment, right? We want to pray for Ephesians 1, eyes of our understanding being enlightened. We want a prophetic spirit. We want to be led by the Lord. That's crucial. So you just only did what you saw the fathers doing. We're reaching for that. We're still using wisdom, and he can be convinced. That's called prayer. But we also want to, he loves that when you say, call him on what his word says, and then ask for those promises to be released. And a lot of times you can just pray and ask, and there's sometimes where it's a mourning, or it's a like crying out, especially when something like massive, like a toppling of an industry or something. But a lot of times you can ask once and then decree it done. There's 4 different kinds of prayer, and that's the Lord's Prayer. Each line of that is a model of that. But that's the power that we have through all this stuff to topple this and so what will happen though is each time it's like the devil loves to swoop in and take credit for something, right? So that right now there's a lot of people that are prophetically helping people get out of this, but then they're advocating it into they're setting them up for the Antichrist, and so they're telling them how to cut off, but they aren't doing it by prophetic spirit. They're just helping people get into self-worship, and that it's because you're so good that they, you're just, your energy, your aura, you're an angel, you're Egyptian. There's 1,000 different false identities. Then they want you to cooperate with demons and other gods and just do all this stuff that have they not intervened this kind of way, if what your destiny, what God wrote for you, as in terms of your calling, your gifts, and your power, and all of that they're trying to give you a counterfeit version of that ends up being Luciferian, something that'll see Christ as the enemy, and the Antichrist as the actual Christ or whatever. That's the thing, right? So that's the whole concept. So there needs to be now a prophetic voice that comes forth in it, and it's like it said, John the Baptist's spirit, Isaiah 40, proclaim to these ones who have been sacrificed for their families, your God reigns. It's they're calling up the, because there is an element of just it is like being an earth angel or something like that, in a sense of just we're bearing forth the light of Christ, and that's what people are drawn to us. And so we don't want to have people drawn to our light and then use that to get more favor, get out of traffic tickets or something like that. I mean, sure, let's do that, but that's the point, is that we would be leading people to Christ, not using that energy to be worshipped. And so, but you want to be, and that's not just being in fellowship with Christ and realizing that His praise is what counts. And there's a heavenly reward for obedience, and that it breaks the power of shame and guilt, and that He's going to keep taking you back. You keep saying yes to Him, and keep wanting to be taken back to him, and that's what he's going to do. Now, I mean, there's this place for heartfelt repentance and to get fully delivered from everything you need to be delivered from. But a lot of the stuff you didn't realize how much power you have to even just decree that. So, but I'm not saying the struggle's not real, and I'm not saying that there's people who have to rewire their brain and out of coping mechanisms, and you know, you need, and it needs to be there. A lot of times you need fellowship and sometimes therapy, and you know, there's a whole natural progression. God is committed to the natural in certain different ways. So let's go to the next section here. You know, the merchants, all the nations get deceived by this sorcery. And so a lot of that is just the gaslighting we're talking about as a form of sorcery. The kind of stuff they do, it's like it's because intention and power and access, and this is power that you would have had they know more about spiritual stuff than Christians do. Because like it's not in the Bible for a reason, because we're being led by the Lord to do these things, and we just read about him walking on water, and it just pushes us into such unbelief sometimes. But like, it's knit to the need to do so. First of all, you know, I mean, there's a, and the need to do so is kind of you can play fast and loose with that a little bit. I mean, you know, the water into wine, was that really needed? But that ended up being a prophetic act, right? And so there's this harlot message, which is a mystery for the end times, and there's the bride message for the time, and that's so massive and so powerful. But it's kind of like that's the greatest wine that's been, you know, and wine by meaning like it's a wine skin, it's a theology, it's an understanding that's been around, but like not fully experienced or unpacked. But it will be in this generation, because it's like it's we saving the best for last, and this generation is going to do more greater works than he did. They will most likely need to, but it's like it's a fun like partnership with God thing. Like we're not supposed to be anxious or fearful for anything, because who's in charge of the aggregate? Well, you are, if you take your power back and you walk in alignment with him, and then you stay close to him, because you're going to be praying and get the mind of Christ and be able to direct these things, right? So there's so many scriptures that A, could be contradictory, or B, could be they meant something in one context, and like Paul giving instructions to certain, you know, things that are happening within cultures, and he's having the mind of Christ. But to really exegete it out, you have to understand that like that verse has been attacked for 2,000 years. But then even still, there's another verse that like trumps it and helps you understand. Well, yes, he said that for this thing, but like Jesus also said this over here, and if you're one of the last time generations, then actually this verse means more. So that's being led by the Spirit of knowing how to apply, actually, you know, without having to have a theology degree, but just by being led by the Spirit and growing in these things, and filling your heart with the Word of God. And, you know, and some people, there's going to be so many visions and dreams and angelic encounters, and that's part of what they've been stealing from you, is that access to the supernatural. And your faith to just ask for something and then have no delay and just have it be there. And I'm not, you know, I'm talking about just like spiritual encounters and revelation understanding in scriptures and things like that. So if you do the prayer, I take my power back from everybody that's stolen from me. Well, first of all, you may have just like taken down a whole cold or something that was depending on that power that someone else, you know, soul tie or whatever, however it got out. So that, and but then it's like they might try to tell you about whatever, you know, something to put fear in you from there, but just understand that that's an attack to get you into fear so that you don't walk in your power. Okay, so you saw, don't see this movie, but The Star is Born. That's a big picture of some of the stuff. Like his power is, in a sense, redirected to somebody else. Someone else takes his star, and that's one way of thinking of it. But, I mean, there's a lot of movies that elaborate on the concept. You know, destiny. If you can search on TikTok, whatever, destiny swapping. So you know, it's all kind of all over the place, and it's all over the Bible. You know, Leah and Rachel, Jacob and you know, Esau, Lucifer and Adam. I mean, it's just like it's all of these. You know, each one of those in the book of Genesis, each one of those stories is a powerful spiritual law that's warning you about that. If you like, this is what the lukewarm thing being spit out of the mouth can look like when someone else is stealing your scroll, and it's what that's the Esau thing, and it's what the when Jesus said the kingdom of heaven suffers violence and the violent take it by force, like Jacob literally wrestled the Lord for this, these kind of things. And this kind of kingly authority over the earth, they've got the Christians in this message that's omitting sort of scriptures and elements that would have you walk in your power, and reinforcing the ones where it's the pastor has all of it, and that's been helpful for certain lack of chaos and that kind of thing. But when we're looking at a real spiritual war and the increase of demonic and all these things, people, you can stay asleep in the simulation. Paul even said, it's good for a man not to be married because then his interests are divided. And that now the curse, that's sort of part of the curse of Adam and Eve. I still submit, I don't think it's dazed and confused kind of thing. I think it is more of someone the Lord has for you that is also wants the kingdom just as much as you do, what Eve was meant to be, and that is like a coming alongside because you're aligned, because you want the best for them and they want the best for you. They understand that the Lord rewards their work and sees everything, and so they wouldn't be trying to get your power rerouted somewhere else, something like that. So, but again, it's or just even just trying to put your fire out because it's a competitive thing or whatever. But the people, a lot of these groups, the Luciferians, all these things that are into these things, and it's strategic infiltration. They look at Akashic records, they look at psychic stuff or whatever, they see who's who, and then they target the ones relative to certain destinies and what they would have in God. There's a certain element of God being outside of time and what you're meant for. But the thing is, they've seen that, and you're still going to get there, right? It's a kind of a false concept, and that's kind of hard to explain until you understand all the timeline stuff, which we'll get to in probably another video. But again, it's the Psalm 1 method of just you think you're so strong you can hang out with this person, and then next thing you know you're sitting with them, and then next thing you're mocking, and that's part of it. So the people that are born into them this stuff, or have gone through the rituals and the lodge and all that kind of stuff, it takes a certain amount of spiritual authority to really get them delivered. But that can feel why it's sort of there's just so much of this Delilah energy, this Jezebel energy. There are all of these figures that are just the hatred of the patriarchy and the hatred of what they think men are, and so where we've seen just the decimation of the household and the splitting up of families, and then just people just having kids and then divorcing and then being supported by that person and using them as a resource, that kind of thing. So Babylon traffics in human souls. Maybe should have started out with this verse, but in the Greek we're talking about the literal souls of men, or the life force, the energy, and that kind of thing. So it's when Jesus is talking about everybody's going to betray everybody at the end of the age, it's Cain and that spirit, because Cain gets to then be the next of kin inheritor of that Abel's sacrifice that got him the access, the provision, right? And now we know Christ died for our sins. He is a sacrifice, and we commune with him and walk in that. But that's the trade, the exchange. So that's where the sort of spiritual trafficking is happening, this spiritual holocaust there. The systematic targeting, so that you don't walk in your destiny, your scroll, and your access to the Lord. And to get you to beholding Babylon, right? Because we behold and become. We behold and we become. I should have had that verse in there, 2 Corinthians. And so if you're beholding Babylon and not Zion and not the Lord by spirit of wisdom and revelation, because they've got you to not believe the Spirit does that, then that's that access, that power is going to go somewhere else. And now they will probably build Babylon as well. But putting all of these things, these limits on your power and your mind and all that stuff is another part of it too. But you do want to become radically kind of obsessed with obedience and being led by Him. I think that's the place of wisdom right here. But not to put a limit on until you get there. It's not going to happen for you, whatever. I'm just saying that there's more to be had there, and you want to have a heart to set for obedience, if that makes sense. So some of these Ezekiel verses have been really interesting. So false signs and wonders meant to deceive. Yeah, again, it's just programming the matrix. That the news, the government, the totalitarian fear of this and this is happening, it's going to take over this and all these things. Even what I'm doing here now is not meant. Most things are meant to drive you into fear, but like just like pray against it and then move on. Don't obsess over it. I mean, if you hear it, the Lord. I'm just a lot of times I'll be like, destroy the plans of the enemies. God, scatter my enemies. The Lord rebuke that plan of wickedness or whatever, and then ask, well, I'll let it go. Obsessing with it and then being in unbelief or the idea of just like that the devil's more powerful than God. That's what fear is saying, and that you aren't who he says you are. If you want to be saved, then you're still in the kingdom. Like that counts. Just pursue that. So okay, so really interesting verse here in Ezekiel. I think it's like 13:19. I didn't get the numbers in there, but it's there's some rituals that they were doing back then. It's symbolic of the things that are happening now with the technology version of these kind of things, or just tracking and just these groups. But it's talking about, will you hunt down souls belonging to my people to keep your own souls alive, right? Because like a lot of these like people, these predatory spiritual predators, they really don't. How do I say this? Like they should have had judgment and the consequences of those actions a long time ago. But because you can manipulate angels a little bit, which we'll get into in a minute, that this by creating these sort of unions, there was a great video that came out the other day. Sex is the spiritual contract. Taylor Welch's channel. That's a really biblical concept that was developed at a couple different places, and you can cut cords on that, and you can end those contracts, but they're betting on your ignorance that you won't do that, and then they just go through enough people or whatever to get that, and it's an exchange of karmic merging, and so that's why Paul was like, with such a man don't even eat, right? Because these angels are going to like associate these karmic debts, and then they try to do stuff in the Babylonian courts, which are obviously you need to be walking in your power and appealing to the heavenly ones, right? Oh, that was a big one. I've been waiting for that revelation. Yeah, that's a good way to say that. So that heavenly can overturn what they wrote on the. Wow, that's good. On these sort of debt ledgers that they sort of collect, and they use a lot to manufacture and smear campaign, and there's lies, and there's a little liar and all these things. It doesn't take much for God to reveal who you really are, but again, you need him to break into, because by the measure that you've judged others, that can which is we're supposed to do, but we're also supposed to, like, we have this massive trump card called the blood of Christ, and that's, Melchizedek priesthood and everything that that's what we want to be teaching, but we're going after this. But that's the place of where, the Lord has to judge, and everybody has to. The people who are into New Age and all that stuff, they're like, no one can escape karma, no one can do and saying all these things. But like, the difference between them and you is that, and they could have it if they wanted to, was that you have the blood of Christ and sincere heart of His, and if you're chosen one, then you've been targeted. And so that we're talking about everything from systematic trauma or SA, systematic but ritual betrayals, and what they call a humiliation ritual, kind of like the Carrie type thing. If you've had some of those, all these things, sacrifice season, and because like those have suicide has been happening more by any other cause than these ritual humiliation rituals. And then the exiling from communities, and they throw spell work behind that, trying to get people to do obviously that kind of thing. And then they put life and church policies and all that stuff on that, in the spirit and the natural and all that. But the Lord is breaking in and ending all this stuff, and those spells aren't working, and it's a whole thing here. So again, we're taking back our power, we're walking our identity, and you may have to cut off some people, but that's like, Jesus had to do this, and He gave us this. Look at everything that Jesus says about betrayal and about being going through a smear campaign, or going through. He says like the man's enemies would be in his own house sometimes, and talking about father against son, mother against daughter, like all these divisions. And then he says a prophet has no honor in his hometown. He says, follow me, let the dead bury their own dead. And he says, who are my mother and fathers? Those who are doing the will of the Lord, right? And so that's kind of this end of the age paradigm that he spoke all these things. Because Paul was like, don't be unequally yoked with unbelievers. And it doesn't say, well, even if they're your bestie or something. Like, it's just like, but yeah, there is people that want to be in your light, but also want to take you out so that they inherit that kind of thing. Or just straight up manifest off of it and sabotage you. So you'll know it when that's where the eyes are being enlightened, and as the veil is lifted up, and you start to see like, hey, I don't know if that person is really my friend. You know what I mean? That's they build people up just so they can knock them down, and they get in their foot in the door, and then what they do with that foot, it's not. It's awful. Like, I've seen this stuff too. I mean, using access to somebody, and then be like, yeah, I know him, yeah, and then just saying awful things about this person, and using that proximity to then destinies. That's another form of destinies. There's tons of them, but yeah. So, drunk with the blood of the saints, the life force of the saints, and this is a principality concept behind people, but like, again, the cults, covens, secret societies, they are at different levels, knowingly seeking this out, especially if they're engaging in the sorcery, or that they're chanting, or whatever the coven is behind them, and they're trying to reprogram simulations and that kind of thing. So, quantum reality engineering. If you've ever like watched a movie and then started to see those elements in your life, especially if you watched it with a Luciferian, it would have been better to do before you watch that movie to declare your intention and say anything like, I do not consent to this being programmed into my life. I'm watching this without desire for this to be part of my reality. I do not want to be of Babylon. I want to be of the Lord. But yeah, that's it. Because there's a whole thing about revelation of consent that goes back to a lot of the massive elite stuff and some of the structures, and it's been written about to a degree where just like if you're presented this negative information, that they can use that in a Babylon court as consent because you didn't pray against it and you watched it or whatever. So again, this is about loving truth though, because this, like, even God himself is sending strong delusion so that you will believe what's false on purpose. And that's supposed to wake you up. That's supposed to scare you at all. It's supposed to be like, and again, a lot of it is, it's not even aimed at his people necessarily. It's aimed at those who fall away because they weren't, I'm not going to get into like what we're saved to begin with or anything, but like they were called and they wanted to be chosen, and they positioned themselves to be chosen because they love truth, right? And it's a little bit tricky because a lot of us are just waking up and from a strong delusion, and so now we're getting, or real revelations are coming, the understanding is coming, all the veils are being lifted, we're seeing life like it really is, and we're kind of talking ourselves through this. And again, we want to have this prayer of, make my delight in your word, make your word more fascinating than anything that Babylon has to offer. Okay, so we want to love truth, we don't want to be sent strong delusion. And we want to see show me what the delusion is now. Gently, nicely, please show me where I was in delusion and open my eyes. Okay, so, and again, this is like people changing times in the law. That's like reality manipulation. That's some of the stuff that like people are stuck in these like Groundhog Day loops sometimes, and getting just short of the breakthrough and all these things like this. And you can just like align yourself and speak against that, rebuke that, and find out who maybe you have in your life that you maybe need to cut out. Again, with such a man don't even eat, that. So, but sometimes if there's like job or something like that, you maybe don't have the means to do that. But God, like there are certain things where that's like it's different than like fellowship outside of like employment and that kind of thing. So anyway, 7 heads, 7 mountains: religion, education, media, finance, politics, arts, and family. That's where they've sought to replace God in all of these areas, and with that Jezebel spirit, again, worshiping the creation instead of the creator, and not even knowing it's your power and that via God that was doing this. So they they hand their power over to the beast, Revelation 17. That's another verse in Revelation 17, but it's 17:13, right there. So here's what I'm like. It's there. I mean, it's in your Bible. So if you think this is crazy, well, it's just Revelation 17:13. Sorcery, spiritual manipulation through control symbols, spell systems. I mean, I would say I'm actually been looking to change. It's not supposed to be symbols. It's supposed to be like cults, covens, illusions. And it's spiritual abortions and natural abortions too. The murder is part of that too. And then the murder kind of thing. I mean, that's where they're trying to do like the AI clones or whatever, take people out and then replace them with the AI clone, or do the NPCs and all that stuff, or the simulation programming that does all that stuff, and the witchcraft illusions and all that, and messing with people's perceptions. But here's the verse I was quoting. Who has bewitched you? Galatians. Paul knew that. Like, no, seriously. Like he actually said, we think, oh, Paul, he's so funny. He thinks the witches are real. Actually, Simon the Sorcerer was a thing. With witches turned. It's just like, I cannot believe how many pastors just like straight up rob people out of their own lives by just passing on the spirit of unbelief in the spirit. It's like, oh, just watch TV. There's no witches. There's no one does any magic. It's like, dude, it's everywhere. The same people telling you no magic. Like, is that like chance on there? It's wild. But again, that's all. Half the stuff bounces off just because you don't want to believe in that stuff more than you believe in your own prayers. It's just meant to make you jealous and realize that, like, oh, the spirit stuff is real, and they believe it's real, and it kind of makes sense now. I probably should pray and just keep asking for eyes to see, ears to hear, spirit of discernment, and kind of go from there. But there can be real assassination, character assassination. Again, the Lord is justifying us. He's fighting on our behalf. He's a provider. A lot of this stuff is like not to make you panic. It's to make you just like press into Him, and just thank Him that He's fighting these battles on your behalf and showing you where you need to like cooperate. Like in what that looks like for you. Because a lot of stuff He's working out your justice, and He's your provider, right? But you don't want to. I mean, there's an element of understanding this, though. There's just a lot of value, and it's sort of like a test for a lot of us too, for what will come, and we'll need to walk in Jehovah Jireh, God's provider, not when the mark of the beast is the currency, right? So it's something different than money, and that's just trusting in God when watching He provide for you, but like also. I hate to put strings on it or like say, well, you have to do this, whatever. But like, obviously, you want to try not to be lukewarm, right? But I mean, I feel like there is a call. Like, we're asking, like, Lord, what does it mean? And again, I'm processing this stuff. I'm not teaching. I'm just telling you what the Lord showed me, because that's how you. If you give it away, you get more, right? So, and I want to help like those who are going through. I've heard a lot of testimony. I've seen a lot of different things, and people reach out that they're waking up to what exactly life was really like. So, again, Lord, what does it look like to not marvel at Babylon? What does it look like to not marvel and worship the creation? What my engagement with secular media. I think it's good to set the intention before it. I think it's even better to just like keep worship going on on your house. Especially if you feel like any kind of spiritual warfare is happening. I think it's great to take spiritual baths, just like pray over it to be living water and to wash your energy field. I mean, Paul would do that before he went in the temple. It'd be like, these little rituals, covenant is like a little ritual, or communion, I mean. If you eat communion, that's these new agey things. Well, Jesus kind of told us to do them. But like, it's not like, it's not the witchy counterfeit kind. That's godless, or different gods, but the kind that's like that you're doing something in the natural and something is happening in the spirit. So that happens when you're praying for people, when you're decreeing things over your sphere, and all that. So Ezekiel 13 is really great for harlot stuff, understanding it. Revelation 17:18, Jeremiah 50:51. Those are big ones right now. Understanding. I'm gonna get into some Paul stuff though. I've always wondered about this because of the angels. What? I'm sorry. What, Paul? What's because of the angels? We're wearing a head covering. The women are because of the angels. Yeah, unpack that, and he just never does. And the commentators are like, I don't know, so, or I think it's this or something. But like angels see through energetic roles, covenant signs, and spiritual alignment. So like who you hang out with and who are you aligned with, what you do, that kind of thing. And so if identity signals are hijacked or altered, then it can be misidentification. So take heed what you hear. Like one of the scariest, most realist, like think about it every day, Bible verses. Take heed what you hear. What you measure will be measured back to you. Good company corrupts bad habits, and then just like they think you're all this because of who you hang around, who you listen to, and your secret guilty pleasures and all that stuff. So that's where the mechanism behind angelic misdirection. Again, not to put a qualifier on your blessing necessarily. Like I keep pressing in for that. I mean, it's not like the people who were stealing your blessings or whatever were doing all this holy stuff. I mean, they're like witches and stuff. Like they're not earning it either. It's because there's either like a Jonah type things happening to like wake you up, or it's just like it's unusual, it's a lot of meat on the bone, and so it goes to the next of kin, and or certain things are more intense than others, that kind of thing. I mean, there's nothing about the eye gates, and we're really trying. That's the part we're actually asking for more understanding. So I have some theories, but I want to go into it so I have a bit more on that. But just keep pressing in. That's all I'm saying, and just receive. What is yours? Just pray the prayer. I had to take my power back, and then get where you need to be, and the provisions could come. So, but spiritual alignment is just something that's I'm not even talking about the head covering necessarily, right? I'm talking about just that Jacob was able to give us a spiritual principle of people wrestling for the blessing, take spiritual violence, and then all of these copycats, destiny swappers, soul swapping type things, never sleeping with people but never cutting the soul tie, and then letting them live off in energy, even though they're you wish them well or whatever, but they're that maybe you're not on great terms with them, or just like they're already what they targeted you in a predatory way in the first place, like the Jezebel. So cutting those soul ties and releasing them with blessing them and all that kind of stuff, but like not giving them mental energy or anything to reaffirm a contract, soul contract, that kind of thing. Because soul contracts is like that's how Babylon is manipulating angels right now, and so that's what we're calling out. And so Jacob's garment deception is a spiritual template of how this stuff kind of happens. And that's where you can, they manipulate the times and all those things. You can feel like you're in an alternative simulation, like you're not walking your destiny, and you don't have the Midas touch that Joseph does. And then maybe it's meant to be. There was a divine timing thing where you're in the dungeon season, because that's just a place of training for reigning, and that there is, God's wisdom behind all of these things, and why it happens. It's I would focus a little less on that, but the Lord may show you. I mean, it's you don't want to get into bitterness, right? Again, it's all about forgiveness and owning our own parts of the stuff too, but also not saying, I deserved it or that kind of thing. I mean, it's like we want reconciliation, we want to receive, and we want to focus on the future, not dwell on the past, but like heal the trauma enough, realize any spiritual passivity in the places that kind of stuff happened. Again, there's so much trauma and MK Ultra stuff that was systematically done towards you, most likely, that his blood covers your sin. But again, you have the power of these people. All they can do is hide your energy. But if you repent of something and mean it, or you're reaching for it, the place, that's why they use the hypocrisy thing to disqualify people, So that's probably where you're meant to have a ministry to help other people and call them out of it or whatever. People might have bad dreams like that, and it's because they're meant to have prophetic dreams, and so the Lord, the devil was attacking that or something, or just no dreams at all, and that's has been more common. And it says, we start to ask and lay hold of our destiny, and so that it's not going to Esau, not going to the New Age, not going to the witches and all these places too. But yeah, it's intense. There can, I don't want to. I'm trying to keep it surface level. Matthew 24:10, many will fall away and betray one another and hate each other. That's, I hate to say that, like, we're seeing more and more of that, but it feels like that way. We know it will happen more until the Antichrist comes, and then the Lord comes after that, after we release the seals and trumpets on him through prayer. So 21:38, they saw the son. They said to themselves, "This is the heir. Come, let us kill him and have his inheritance." Right. So they identify the chosen ones. They systematically betray them. If it's Masonic, they don't want them to the person to know. If it's Luciferian, they want to taunt him with it. Or Scroogeans that too, but they also want to replace him and get in the family structure. Steal or destroy wealth. Prophetic influence. So, do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. For what partnership has righteousness with lawlessness? Right. That's the powerhouse verse. Take that one seriously. And again too, they can do these if they know what they're doing to escape rituals, it's a bad deal. Spiritual burden offloading. It's you just plead the blood of Jesus over that, or like BISO offloading, that kind of stuff. Visiting the iniquity of the fathers and the children. A lot of these people just spiritually can recognize that stuff. They might have a psychic gift or something like that. Emotional dependency. Rescue illusions, the victim, savior, persecutor complex. That they switch those roles. You try to rescue them, and then they switch to persecuting you. That's when they flip or whatever. The narcissistic spirit behind that. So the rituals that they do that bring in other spirits that help them oppress people in a sense. They may have, and sometimes the gaslighting is because the spirit did all that stuff to you, and so they really don't know. It might feel like they're a pathological liar, but it's also like they don't know what darkness, like possession type thing or something. That can be a narcissistic thing too, or whatever. But also sometimes they believe they disassociate often, in that they don't always know what they did during that time. But if you're a Christian, like that can't, there's an element of that, just like there's limits on that. So, let's see. Love this promise. I will continue with those who continue with you, and I'll save your children. That can be ultimately you pray and say, Lord, you said this, and then He delights that you take Him upon that. They try to exhaust Esau and then get him to just so focus on the natural that he neglects his spiritual, and instead of having the spiritual ambition, right, that he's meant to have. So you have a scroll, you have a destiny in God. He knows the plans He has for you. Now, these jokers, they got plans for you, even when they say you don't. They still do. They lie a lot, and they do it, and it's like they try to make it hard to see who did what. But the Book of Deeds, people have seen that in the heavens. I think that's the best name for it. But they might call it like just your Akashic record, or just like the Lord says, "I know I have the plans for you, right? Give you hope in a future." Well, He does, and it's sad that these people know it and you don't sometimes, or that's what they've. But maybe you've had a bunch of prophetic words or something, and so you kind of do know what they are, and then they've systematically tried to stop that. So, betrayal energy. They love that betrayal energy, and so sometimes that's where the cheating is. It's like, why would they cheat? It doesn't even make sense. Well, they may not know it, or that they might, and that there's a spiritual element behind getting other people into your covenant, in a sense. That is and in such a way as to diminish you and to maximize the power, and then to direct spell work at you so that you don't walk in your power. But again, that's not always the case. And again, don't focus on that as much as like focus on God's provision, because and protection, right? And just begin to talk to Him about that more. And then I'll be publishing some more resources about like spiritual protection and how to like work in more of that if you feel like that's needed. But there's a lot of other people who've written about that more. But again, just you want to make sure that you always have more belief in His protection than you do about their garbage. And that has to do with what you fill your mind with too. So you can see why now this like makes more sense. Like Paul knew these, it's good for man, not just woman, that kind of thing. And why there's so much of like the systematic devalue and discard that energetically gives these like forces power. The whole like who needs who the most and who can be the first to like ghost the other person and all that stuff. Those exchanges, and that's more of like a younger, like a mature thing, but they want to try to disillusion you to that kind of thing. Sometimes. So married men anxious about worldly things, and interests are divided. I already talked about that one. This is the other one I said earlier. Don't associate anyone who in the name of even if he bears the name of a brother, but if he's guilty in these things, right, not to even eat with such a one. And that's because some of these know how to do that. This is like what worship Christians like are those that like pretend to be in the church, stuff like that, but like they just like they want to sabotage. These witches get in church and they want to sabotage. And so sometimes the only way to tell that they're not really that, is because of these things, or it's just like that's what they want to do, is to try to, good company, corrupt bad habit, or just sort of stuff in the spirit. What they think they can do in the spirit in Babylon, I'm not going to glorify it by talking about it, but just, I think there's also wisdom in staying prayed up on this stuff, but like not in a fearful way. So you're still connected to your original divine timeline, no matter how long you've been like associated in sort of like simulation when it's not your actual destiny, right? So it's just a life experience. Once it's like, I don't know, I'm able to do more of this and the channel grows and I can do more things with more support, then we can dive into some of the quantum stuff. Until then, though, I just like, there needs to be more people that understand what I'm talking about. I feel like, because I don't want to undo the easier stuff to understand by talking about stuff that like is the PhD. I don't even say that, whatever, the calculus level. So there's something about marveling to your name there, but like people have had their name written out and then written back in, so it's biblically. So yeah, the wages of sin is death, but the Lord loves to give second chances, and some of the stuff is a progression, and it's a heart posture. Again, we have the blood that we're meant to plead over our symbols here, and let every symbol turn into more of a zeal to get completely free. So again, that's the call of this message, is to come out of Babylon. Find out where's Babylon in our lives and where can we get out of it. Not share authority, counterfeit intimacy, that which God has joined together, not man and not Masons. And then, example, Leah fought for Rachel. Babylon spiritually replaces you on this timeline, this life experience, not the one that would have been equally yoked for you, right? But one that was beholden, so to speak. And then, they want to go after your prophetic voice, your spiritual territory. If you're somebody who's up there in terms of like access to God, or like prolonged history of access to God, and a call for strong spiritual authority, that kind of thing, then they want to take that, of course. Sophisticated counterfeit systems, basically. drain your energy, delay your union, emotional surveillance, handler spouses. That's where it's just like being aware of the company you keep. So you don't want to be double-minded, James 1:8. But the more we can have not Babylon soothe us, but the Lord, I think is ideal. But without being religious, right? Because you can watch something in an anointed way. I'm still processing what that would be. But the prayer to pray, let me bump this up here. I'm going to leave it on the screen and just let you pray it. This is the one that'll open up all the doors for you and get them out of your energy. I call back all power, soul fragments, divine inheritance from every timeline, person, portal, and dimension, shielding myself and those entrusted to me by the Lord Jesus from all unholy interference. Break generation curses and release all ancestral burdens. Separation back and forward, align my bloodline and alliances with the divine order of the kingdom. I forgive all, release what is not mine, lay down what I no longer need to carry, and declare that I'm safe, I'm whole, I'm restored, and still in Christ. In the name of Jesus, I break and banish all spells, mind control, these contracts, curses, false timelines, and energetic ciphers that do not align with God's will. I withdraw all consent and revoke all access now and forevermore.